بالعالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. Tonight, inshallah ta'ala, we will be finishing up the chapter regarding fasting and the chapter regarding i'tikaf, meaning chapter regarding i'tikaf. How did the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam make i'tikaf? We will touch on that briefly. And then we will move on to a very important chapter of the book, which is very unique about this book, actually. And that is the chapter with regards to the issue of names and the kind of words that the Prophet ﷺ would use and the kinds of words that he would not use, the kind of things that he would say and the kind of things that he would prohibit people from saying, etc. So it's a very unique chapter in this book, and it's actually one of my favorite chapters in this book. We were discussing last week the days that the Prophet ﷺ would fast or encourage fasting. We've mentioned that fasting anytime is permissible. There are certain days which are not permissible to fast on their own. There are certain days which are not permissible to fast at all. And the rest is open season. A person can fast anytime they like. To begin, we'd like to discuss the days that he encouraged a person fast. The day of Ashura, which is the 10th day of the first month of the Islamic calendar. We discussed that in detail last week. Also, he fasted and encouraged fasting the day of Arafah, which is the 9th day of the 12th month of the Islamic calendar. That is the 9th day of Dhul Hijjah. So it's the day before Eid, right? That day, the day of Arafah, the Prophet ﷺ was asked about the reward of a person who fasts the day of Ashura and the day of Arafah. He said the day of Arafah, it will expiate sin of a year previous and a year to come. And as for the day of Ashura, it will expiate the sins of a year past, right? So we understand and we surmise from this that fasting the day of Arafah is superior to fasting the day of Ashura. We discussed this in detail. Likewise, the Prophet ﷺ was narrated to have fasted Mondays and Thursdays. This was a common practice, and very rarely did he ever not fast these 2 days of the week. Likewise, he encouraged fasting 3 days a week, 3 days a month, excuse me. So he encouraged, just in general, fast 3 days a month, any 3 days. And it's preferable that of these 3 days, it be the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th of the Islamic lunar calendar. Likewise, it is permissible to fast any day, but it is not permissible to fast every day. If a person fasts every single day, this is not permissible for a person to do. As the Prophet ﷺ has mentioned, "Man sama ad-dahr fala sama wala aftar." Whoever fasts all the time, then they have neither fasted nor have broken their fast. So this is not something which is of the Prophet ﷺ's practice. And as a matter of fact, he admonished his companions. Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As used to fast every day, and he prohibited him from doing this, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Likewise is the issue of fasting on Saturday alone. just choosing Saturday by itself to fast. This is not permissible. Ibn Al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he says here, وَقَدْ رُوِيَ أَنَّهُ كَانَ يَصُومُ السَّبْتَ وَالْأَحَدَ كَثِيرًا. هذه الرواية ضعيفة أخرجها الإمام أحمد في مسنده بإسناد ضعيف، وصدر الرواية ابن القيم رحمه الله بصيغة التمريض فقال وقد روي، والمحدثون إذا قالوا روي فهذه صيغة تضعيف. Ibn al-Qayyim says, and it has been reported. Notice the wording here. It has been reported. Usually scholars of hadith. Now I want to be specific. If you're reading a book for a scholar who specializes in hadith, Ibn Kathir, Ibn al-Qayyim, scholars that are known for their expertise in the science of hadith, if they say it has been narrated, usually that means that the narration is weak. The difference between saying and the Prophet ﷺ said, or saying he said, or he authentically said, or indeed he said, something like that. But when it's in this way, like it's been narrated that he said, that means it's usually weak. Ibn al-Qayyim here says, and it's been narrated that the Prophet ﷺ used to fast on Saturdays and Sundays often. This narration is collected by Imam Ahmad, and it's an inauthentic narration. It's a weak narration. It's not narrated that it's not authentic that he would fast on Saturdays. As a matter of fact, Ibn al-Qayyim says this narration is weak. وفي صحة الحديث النظر وروي النهي عن صوم السبت, and it's also been narrated that the Prophet ﷺ prohibited fasting on Saturdays. Okay? This narration is differed upon amongst the scholars of hadith. Some scholars view this narration to be authentic, meaning that he prohibited a person fast on Saturday. However, there are other narrations that articulate that it's permissible to fast on Saturday as long as you fast a day before or a day after. So you can't fast it alone by itself. There's a narration in a Sunnah, which is authentic, that the Prophet ﷺ said, do not fast on Friday alone unless you fast a day before it or a day after it. So if I wanted to fast Friday and fast the day after, I'd be fasting on Saturday, and that's permissible. So fasting it together with Friday or Sunday is permissible. Fasting Saturday alone by itself is impermissible. Likewise, Friday. Fasting Friday alone by itself. This is not permissible. A person must fast Thursday or Saturday along with it. So those are 2 days of the week that a person can fast under the condition that they fast a day before it or a day after it. This is not speaking, these narrations are not speaking about fasting days which are obligatory. What do I mean by that? Let's say a person has days of Ramadan that they missed. Can they fast one day to make up for Ramadan on Friday or on Saturday? Yes, because that's an obligatory fast, right? Let's say a person has an expiation. They have to fast 3 days, right? Kafara. Can they fast Friday on its own or Saturday on its own? Yes, because it's an obligatory fast. But if it is a fast that is not obligatory, right? It's just extra voluntary, then you have to fast the day before or after, Friday and Saturday only. Now, what if a person just fasts Saturday or just fasts Sunday or Friday? Is their fast acceptable? What appears is that the fast itself is acceptable, but the person has not followed the Sunnah, right? It's also impermissible for a person to fast on the day of Eid, It's not permissible to fast on the first day of Shawwal. It's not permissible to fast on the 10th day of Dhul Hijjah. Okay? So the Eid, we have two Eids, right? The first Eid is the first day of Shawwal. Right? Ramadan's over, the first day of Shawwal, that's the day of Eid. Right? The second Eid, the major Eid, is the 10th day of Dhul Hijjah, the day after Yom Arafah, right? That 10th day of the 12th month, that is the day of Eid, Eid al-Adha. It's not permissible to fast that day. Also, in the correct opinion, it is impermissible to fast during the days of Tashriq, Ayam al-Tashriq. What are the days of Tashriq? They are the 11th, 12th, and 13th days of Dhul Hijjah, of the 12th month. That's the day after Eid, the 3 days that come after Eid al-Adha. These days are called Ayam al-Tashriq, right? The Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّهَا أَيَّامُ أَكْلٍ وَشُرْبٍ وَذِكْرٍ لِلَّهِ. He said these days, meaning the days of Tashriq, 11th, 12th, and 13th of Dhul Hijjah, they are days of eating and drinking and remembrance of Allah. And this is why these days are considered part of the Eid, right? A person can slaughter any one of these days. If you want to slaughter for Eid al-Adha, you can slaughter on the 10th, 11th, 12th, or 13th day. All of that is considered part of the Eid. So really, the days of Tashriq are an extension of the day of Eid, Eid al-Adha. So it's not permissible to fast during the days of Tashriq, right? Another time when it is impermissible to fast is Yawm al-Shak, the day of doubt. Why is it referred to as the day of doubt? Well, on the 29th day of Sha'ban, right? The 29th day of Sha'ban. We're looking around for the moon. We're not sure if today is the first day of Ramadan or if tomorrow is the first day of Ramadan. So just to be safe, I'm going to fast that day. That is not permissible. It is impermissible to fast on the day of doubt. It's referred to as the day of doubt because we doubt. We're doubting whether it's Sha'ban or is it Ramadan, right? This is referred to as the day of doubt. So a person says, well, I just want to cover my bases and be safe. No. A person cannot fast that day on his own just to be safe. Because Ramadan only starts when the moon has been sighted and people have acknowledged its sighting. Pay attention to the wording I'm using. When the moon is sighted and people have acknowledged its sighting, right? What does that mean? Why this kind of wording? This wording is important because the month doesn't officially begin until it becomes acknowledged by everybody that the month has begun. So the moon itself is not the month of Ramadan or any month. The moon is an indication of the month. There is a very detailed issue here. What does this mean? So let's say it's Sha'ban, and I see the crescent for Ramadan, right? And so I go and I inform the powers that be or what have you, and they say, no, it's not Ramadan, you didn't see it, right? It's not acknowledged. Do I fast that day alone, or do I not fast? Remember the wording we used. The crescent is not the month. The crescent is an indication of the month. The month is only the month when it becomes acknowledged by the majority of people, right? So there's no instance where I'm fasting Ramadan and no one else is fasting. So even if I happen to see the moon, but nobody fasts because they do not acknowledge that the month of Ramadan has begun, because they think that I didn't see it properly or what have you, I would not fast that day on my own. I would not fast, and I would begin fasting when the people fast. Because the Prophet ﷺ said, in Sunnah al-Tirmidhi, he said, الصوم يوم تصومون والفطر يوم تفطرون والأضحى يوم تضحون. He said fasting is when you all fast, and breaking your fast is when you all break your fast. And Adha, the day of slaughtering, is when you all slaughter, right? So, acknowledgement of the month, this is what commences the month, not necessarily the crescent itself. And so, when it's kind of calculated that the crescent can't really be seen by the naked eye, but it's essentially there and we can see it with telescopes and so forth, that is not the month of Ramadan. That is not the month yet, because people haven't seen it. People haven't acknowledged its commencement, right? So this is referred to as the day of doubt, Yawm al-Shak. Yawm al-Shak is impermissible to fast. It's not permissible to fast just to cover your bases before the day of Ramadan. Rather, we fast when people fast. When our community begins to fast, that's when we fast. What is the point of the moon then? The crescent is an indication of when that should start, when that should end. But it's not the only factor that is taken into consideration when people fast or break their fast. Is that clear? Right? So we see this mistake often, especially for Ramadan, especially for Eid. You've got some people over here fasting and other people over here not fasting. This shouldn't ever happen, because fasting, breaking our fast, the day of Eid, this is a commutative thing. It's something that happens all together. It's not just an issue of dry facts. The moon was there or wasn't there, or that's not exactly the point of it, right? He says, وَالْجَمْعُ بَيْنَهُمَا أَنَّ النَّهْيَ عَنْ إِفْرَادِهِ وَحَدِيثُ صِيَامِهِ إِنَّمَا هُوَ مَعَ الْأَحَدِ. He says, and these narrations that he would fast on Saturday and Sunday, and other narrations he prohibited fasting on Saturday, he said if we were to harmonize between these narrations, one narration we have him doing it, and another we have him prohibiting it, then the prohibition means for a person to fast Saturday on its own. However, if you fast a day before or a day after, it is permissible. Another issue Ibn Al-Qayyim rahimahullah brings up is the issue of i'tikaf. What is i'tikaf? I'tikaf is when a person vows to remain in the masjid for a particular amount of time under certain circumstances, under very particular circumstances. So, when a person makes i'tikaf, there are things which are permissible, things that are impermissible for the person to do. A person vows i'tikaf for 10 days or of the last 10 nights of Ramadan, for instance. Then a person, for instance, cannot leave the masjid, right, for anything aside from that which is absolutely necessary, such as eating or drinking or relieving oneself or something of that nature. Likewise, when a person makes i'tikaf, it is not permissible for a person to engage in any sexual conduct while making i'tikaf in the masjid. Now, the scholars differ on i'tikaf, widely differ on it. Some scholars mention that i'tikaf is only permissible in 3 masajid, right? Only permissible in Mecca, Medina, and Al-Aqsa. Those are the only places that i'tikaf takes place. I'tikaf cannot take place in regular masajid. This is the opinion of Ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu. However, this is not the opinion of the majority of the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There is a narration that some scholars view as authentic, that i'tikaf is not to be done except in 3 masajid, right? Meaning Mecca, Medina, and Al-Aqsa. This narration is differed upon amongst the scholars on whether it's authentic or not. However, this narration doesn't mean that i'tikaf in general is absolutely impermissible outside of these 3 masajid. because we have companions that make i'tikaf in regular masajid. And honestly, the majority of the scholars, the scholarship of Islam, view that i'tikaf is permissible in any masjid. In any masjid, but they say there is a condition, as long as it is masjidun jami'. What is masjid jami'? Major masjid, meaning a masjid that has Jum'ah that is done in it. It's not just a musalla. It's not just a masjid where they pray, but they don't do Jum'ah. That's just a minor masjid. That's just a masjid that people use to pray in. A major masjid is like this masjid, where we have Jum'ah, right? Where we have a resident imam that leads salah and gives Jum'ah and so forth. This is the only kind of masjid that a person can make i'tikaf in. Another issue with regards to i'tikaf is the timing. When can a person make i'tikaf, and how long can their i'tikaf be? The correct opinion, without delving too deeply into the topic, is that i'tikaf is permissible any time of the year, day or night, and for any amount of time. It doesn't have to be necessarily in Ramadan, and it doesn't necessarily have to be when a person is fasting, right? The Prophet ﷺ made i'tikaf in Shawwal. Shawwal, the month after Ramadan. 1 year he didn't make i'tikaf in the last 10 nights, and so he made i'tikaf in 10 days of Shawwal. Also, does a person have to be fasting when they make i'tikaf? Is it a condition of i'tikaf? This is also a difference of opinion. Ibn Al-Qayyim's opinion is that a person must be fasting. And he says there's never been a narration that authentically, clearly states that he ever made i'tikaf while he was not fasting. Meaning every time he made i'tikaf, he was fasting. It was during Ramadan or... However, a very strong opinion, and this is the opinion that is adopted by Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah in his book Al-Minhaj, is that i'tikaf is permissible when a person is fasting and when he's not fasting. Because Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu, he came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said, I vowed that I would make i'tikaf for a single night in Mecca, in the Haram of Mecca, right? And so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, fulfill your vow. Fulfill your vow. So he's going to be there during the nighttime, right? He's going to be making i'tikaf at night. Do we fast at night? No, fasting is daytime activity. Therefore, it is, based on this narration, it is permissible for a person to make i'tikaf while they are fasting or not, during Ramadan or outside of Ramadan, as long as the conditions are fulfilled and there's no specific timeline set. It doesn't have to be 10 whole days, it could be less or more. Now we are going to get into a very unique chapter of this book, Zadul-Ma'ad. The chapter regarding the issue of names and words and nicknames and language that is permissible and language that is impermissible with regards to the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So first we'll start with naming. How do we name our children? What are the best names to name them? What names are impermissible or haram for a person to give another person? Ibn Al-Qayyim rahimahullah says, ثبت عنه صلى الله عليه وسلم أنه قال أحب الأسماء إلى الله عبد الله وعبد الرحمن وأصدقها حارث وهمام وأقبحها حرب ومرة وأنه قال لا تسمين غلامك يسارا ولا رباحا ولا نجيحا ولا أفلح فإنك تقول أثمت هو فلان يكون فيقال لا قال أثمت هو فلا يكون فيقال لا. إيش يعني هذا الكلام؟ يعني تقول هل رباح موجود؟ هل أفلح موجود؟ فيقال لا، ليس موجود. ليس في الدار من أفلح، ليس في الدار من نجح، ليس في الدار من نجا. فهذا أمر لا يستحسن من ناحية الأدبية ومن الناحية اللفظية. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, this narration is in Sunnah Abi Dawood, he says that which translates to, the most beloved names to Allah are Abdullah and Abdul Rahman. And the most befitting names are Harith and Hammam. Harith means someone who is constantly working, constantly tilling, and Hammam is someone who is constantly brooding or thinking, right? These are very befitting names for the human being. Human being is constantly Harith, constantly at work doing something. Even if they're doing nothing, then they're doing nothing, right? Or a person is constantly Hammam. They're constantly thinking and stressing and calculating and contemplating. He says, وَأَقْبَحُهَا حَرْبٌ وَمُرَّةٌ. And the worst names are harb, which means literally war, or murra, which means very sour, right? Now, the Arabs in the time of pre-Islamic era, they would name their children names like this, hoping that these children would turn out to be as their name states. So, for instance, they would name their children, they would name their son, for instance, Harb. Harb means war, hoping that their child would grow up to be war upon their enemies, right? Likewise, they may name their children Murra, right? Which means extremely sour, hoping that they would be this way towards their enemies, right? However, these names are impermissible in Islam because they articulate about the person something that should not be of his characteristic. And the Prophet ﷺ has indicated that a name has an effect on a person. And a person has an effect on their name, as Ibn Al-Qayyim mentions. If you refer to a person by a good name, this will instill a good nature in that person. And if you refer to a person with a bad name, or a terrible name, or a difficult name, etc., this will instill difficulty in that person. It's been indicated in the Sunnah that a person's name has an effect on how they will be, right? And it's also been narrated that he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that every person who is named with a name will end up having a portion of the meaning of that name actualized in his life. So a person should avoid bad names for their children. They should choose names for their children that will cause their children to aspire to good things. And honestly, it's kind of a little bit disheartening when we see Muslims using names that are not essentially Muslim names, naming their children with names that are unique and exotic and are not traditionally Islamic names. The Prophet ﷺ encouraged that we name our children with the names of the prophets, that we name our children with the names of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that we name our children with names that are found in the Quran, that are found in the Sunnah. And some of these other names that are being used often, and some of them are even specific to non-Muslims, this is something which is frowned upon deeply in Islam. Also, the Prophet ﷺ said in one narration, that which translates to, do not name your son Yasar. Yasar means left. Rather, we take the right side as a good omen, not the left side. Likewise, Rabah or Najih or Aflah. Why? These are names that mean he has succeeded. He says, because someone may come and say, is Najih there or Aflah there? Is anyone named Aflah in your home? Anyone named Aflah, meaning succeeded? And they'll say, no, there's nobody here who has succeeded. No, there's nobody here in this house that has succeeded, or that has won, or that has, etc. Here Ibn Al-Qayyim rahimahullah goes into the meanings here. He mentions some particular names which are impermissible, or that the Prophet ﷺ changed, right? He says, وَغَيَّرَ إِسْمَ عَاصِيَةٍ. A woman's name, Asiyah, which means disobedient. Now, why would a person name his child disobedient? Right? This is the name of a female. And the answer is that what they meant is disobedient to their enemies, right? This is an impermissible name, to name your child disobedient. The meaning, Asiyah, right? Likewise, Barra. Barra, which means Barra and Asram and Abi al-Hakam. These are different names which have foul meanings, basically. Abi al-Hakam. Al-Hakam means the father of the all-wise. Al-Hakam. Al-Hakam is not a permissible name to have. And Abu al-Hakam is not a permissible kunya to have. You know, the Arabs, they use Abu and as a kunya. This is referred to as a kunya. What is a kunya? You say Abu Abdullah, Abu Abdurrahman, Abu Hammam, right? It means the father of, usually by their eldest son, sometimes by their daughter, sometimes by something that they did in their life that stuck with them as a kind of nickname, right? Likewise, Khalid, Abdullah, Abdurrahman, right? This is called a kunya. When it has father or mother in front of it, this is called a kunya. Usually the Prophet ﷺ would give the kunya based on a person's eldest son. Their first son, that's where they would get their kunya from. So if you have a son, your first son, his name is Muhammad, you're going to be called Abu Muhammad, right? Usually. And the female as well. But that's not always. There are exceptions to that. For instance, the Prophet ﷺ gave a kunya to a child that didn't have any children, right? He also gave a kunya to Ali ibn Abi Talib. Of course, Ali ibn Abi Talib is his son-in-law, married to his daughter, Fatima, Amirul Mu'mineen, and his first son was Al-Hasan, right? So his kunya was Abu al-Hasan. However, one day Ali radiallahu anhu got into a spat with his wife Fatima. Basically said, you know what, I don't need this, I'm going to the masjid. So he just went to sleep at the masjid at night. So the Prophet ﷺ came looking for him at the masjid. And of course the masjid, the ground, it wasn't carpet like this, just dirt ground, right? So he found him laying in the masjid and he said, Qum ya Aba Turab, right? So he referred to him as Abu Turab, meaning father of the dirt. So it's just like something that happened, right? Something that, an incident that occurred, they may get a kunya from that, right? This is permissible, but the kunya cannot be something that overexalts a person, that puts down a person, or that ascribes a person to something that is that is undesirable, right? This is part of the respect of al-kunya. Do we have kunyas in the Quran? Is there a kunya mentioned in the Quran? Can you think of one? Abu Lahab. Abu Lahab is a kunya, right? Tabbat yada Abi Lahab. What is Lahab? What does Lahab mean? No. Just the word Lahab. What does it mean? Fire, right? Lahab is fire, flames, you know. And the scholars differ on why he was referred to as Abu Lahab. What's most mentioned by the scholars of tafsir is that he was referred to as Abu Lahab because he had very fair skin. Very fair skin. So his face was very red, usually. He wasn't tanned. Usually people that live in the desert, their skin is going to become like leather and very dark and brown, right? But Abu Lahab was a very rich man. He was part of the nobility of Quraysh. He doesn't go out in the sun, right? He's always in the shade. So he had very fair skin, and when he'd get angry, his face would become very red, and he's referred to as Abu Lahab. This is a kunya, right? So Abu al-Hakam is a kunya. That's not a permissible kunya. Who was called and referred to as Abu al-Hakam? Abu Jahl. Abu Jahl's, what does Jahl mean? Ignorance, right? He's referred to as Abu Jahl, father of ignorance. That's not his kunya. His original kunya was Abu al-Hakam, the father of wisdom, immense wisdom. However, the Prophet ﷺ prohibited that a person be referred to as Abu al-Hakam. He said, "Inna Allah huwa al-Hakam." Allah is the Hakam. It's not permissible to have a kunya of Abu al-Hakam because that's one of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Also, that was not a befitting kunya for Abu Jahl. And this man that disbelieved in the Prophet ﷺ and carried this vendetta against him and fought against him and hindered people from the path of Allah, would we call him Abu al-Hakam, the father of immense wisdom? Obviously not. This is not befitting. So the Prophet ﷺ coined him as Abu Jahl. Another name that is impermissible is Hazn. Hazn. Hazn is an obstruction in your path. You have like a barrier or something that's obstructing your path, that's called a hazn. You say this path is very hazn, meaning that it's a path that has a lot of obstructions in it. This is not a permissible name. Also harb, which we discussed. And al-muttaji'. Al-muttaji' is a person who is laying down. Laying down. It's not a very productive name, right? وعافرة هذه اسم أرض وشعب الضلالة. Now he's discussing names of places, right? Now he's discussing names of places. One of these names is شعب الضلالة, the valley of misguidance. It's not a good name to give a valley. The valley of misguidance. Also, Yathrib was a name that he later prohibited. This is the original name of Medina. Do we see a pattern here? We see a pattern, right? That is that any name that articulates something foul or articulates something that is not the value of the Muslims, this is considered a name which is impermissible, or a name which is overly virtuous, right? Or a name that is the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The names of Allah are divided into two categories in this respect. You have a category that is impermissible to give to any other person, like Allah, Ar-Rahman, right? Al-Khallaq. These are names which are specific to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nobody can be named with these names. Then there are other names which can restrictively be used for other people, such as Mu'min, right? Allah's name is Al-Mu'min. So can you name Mu'min? Naam. Another name is Rahim. Allah's name is Ar-Rahim, the most merciful. However, you can name Rahim. Rahim without the alif and the lam, right? This is a restrictive use of the names of Allah, and it is permissible. Oftentimes when someone is named Abdul Rahim, for instance, people will refer to him as Rahim. Or his name is Abdul Kareem. They will refer to him as Kareem. However, sometimes a person's name is Abdul Rahman. Can we call him Rahman? No, that's a restrictive name of Allah, right? Abdul Khallaq. Can we call him Khallaq? No, this is a restrictive name of Allah. What about Abdul Razzaq? Can we call him Razzaq? No, this is a specific name to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. يقول ابن القيم رحمه الله: للأسماء تأثير في المسميات وللمسميات تأثير بها. للأسماء تأثير في المسميات وللمسميات تأثير بها. وكان صلى الله عليه وسلم يستحب الاسم الحسن ويكره الأمكنة المنكرة الأسماء والعبور فيها، كما مر في بعض غزواته بين جبلين فسأل عن اسميهما فقالوا فاضح ومخزن. أراد صلى الله عليه وسلم أن يدخل بين جبلين فسأل عن اسمي هذين الجبلين، فقيل له أحدهما فاضح والآخر مخزن، يعني مخزي، فعدل عنهما ولم يجز بينهما صلى الله عليه وسلم، لأنه كره هذين الاسمين ولم يرد بينهما إذ كان يستطيع أن يمر في غير هذا الطريق. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he says, names have an effect on those who they are referring to. And likewise, people have an effect on their names. He says, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he liked names and preferred names which had nice meanings and were good. And he disliked going to places that had bad names or ominous names. He disliked even passing through those areas if he could at all help it. Then Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah mentions a narration mentioned by Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah in his book Tuhfat al-Mawdud, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was on a journey going to or from a battle, and he came upon two mountains that he wanted to pass between them in the valley of these two mountains. He asked what these mountains were named, what they're called. So they told him these mountains are named Fadih and Mukhzi. Fadih means someone who exposes another person, right? Exposes something bad about that person. And Mukhzi means someone who puts another to shame. So the names of these mountains are Fadih and Mukhzi, very ominous names. So the Prophet ﷺ did not go between these two mountains in that valley, and he chose another path. We have this in names in English as well, and I believe in every language, right? Have like Devil's Creek, right? Or Hell's Kitchen, or Hell's Gate, right? Or you'll have, Valley of Horrors or something like that. There's a valley in the Nahanni Valley. There's a mountain in the Nahanni Valley in Canada, which is referred to as the Valley of the Headless Men, right? The Valley of the Headless Men, because people would go there and camp, and people would find them later deceased with their heads missing. It's actually a true story. The point is that when areas or places have this kind of name, Prophet ﷺ would avoid these places. Why? Because names have an effect on their place, and the place has an effect on the name. A person is usually given a nickname, or a place is given a name or coined with a nickname because of something that happened there, or something that does happen, or something that is ominous about that place. And so he would avoid these places if at all possible, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. وقد أمر النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أمته بتحسين أسمائهم وأخبر أنهم يدعون يوم القيامة بها. أخرجه أبو داود في كتاب الأدب والإمام أحمد في مسنده. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam commanded his nation to choose the best of names for each other and for themselves. And he mentions that people will be called on the day of resurrection by their names. So whatever your child's name is, whatever you choose for your children's name, that's the name that everyone is going to see and hear on the day of resurrection. And that's what the person is going to be called forth for their judgment based, they're going to be introduced by that name. So we should make it a point to choose best names. وقال رحمه الله النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ندب أمته إلى التسمي بأسماء الأنبياء. ندب يعني دعا أمته وحثهم على ذلك، كما في سنن أبي داود والنسائي عن التسمية بأسماء الأنبياء. وقال رحمه الله صح عنه صلى الله عليه وسلم أنه قال تسموا باسمي ولا تكنوا بكنيتي. فاختلف الناس في ذلك على 4 أقوال. تسموا باسمي يعني سموا أولادكم محمدا، لكن لا تكنوا أو تكنوا بكنيتي، يعني كان كنيته ماذا؟ أبو القاسم. لماذا؟ هذا الراجح فيه أنه كان خاصا في عهد النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم، كان خاصا في حياته. فيجوز للإنسان الآن أن يكنى بأبي القاسم، هذا جائز، لكن في وقته في حياته كان لا يجوز لأحد أن يتكنى بكنية أبي القاسم. لماذا؟ لأن الصحابة رضي الله عنهم ما كانوا يخاطبون رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم باسمه، لا يقولون يا محمد، لا يقولون ذلك، وإنما يقولون يا رسول الله، يا نبي الله، يا أبا القاسم. فكانوا ينادونه بكنيته، يقولون يا أبا القاسم. فإذا كان أحد سوى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم له هذه الكنية فيقول يا أبا القاسم، فيلتفت إليه رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ثم يقول لا، ما أنت أردت، فهذا من سوء الأدب الذي يقع مع رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. يعني تخيل الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم موجود وفي عنده واحد كمان كنيته أبو القاسم، فتقول يا أبا القاسم، فيلتفت إليك رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فتقول ما أنت أردت فلان الثاني، فهذا لا يصوغ. فلذلك قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم تسموا باسمي، لأنه لا يقع هذا الخلط في الاسم، لأنهم لا يخاطبونه باسمه، لا يقولون يا محمد، وإنما يقولون يا أبا القاسم. فقال تسموا باسمي ولا تكنوا بكنيتي. وهذا هو الراجح والله أعلم في الجمع بين هذه الأقوال التي ذكرها ابن القيم، ولا حاجة لنا في أن نذكرها. He mentions that the Prophet ﷺ encouraged his nation to name their children with the names of the prophets and messengers, right? Musa, Ibrahim, Nuh, Isa, as was collected by Abu Dawood and An-Nasa'i rahimahullah. Likewise, the Prophet ﷺ said, name your children with my name, but do not give a kunya with my kunya. His kunya was Abu al-Qasim, right? So he encouraged the companions to name their children by his name, Muhammad, but that no one was allowed to have the kunya Abu al-Qasim except for him. Why is this? This is something that is specific, wallahu a'lam, to the era of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If a person has the kunya today of Abu al-Qasim, that's fine. But in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this was avoided. Why? Because the companions radiallahu anhum, they would address the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam by his kunya. They would not address him by his name. So they would not refer to him as, oh Muhammad. They wouldn't call to him like that. They wouldn't address him with his first name. That's very bad manners. They would address him by his kunya. They would say Messenger of Allah, Prophet of Allah. They would say Abu al-Qasim. His kunya was Abu al-Qasim. And so if other people had this kunya of Abu al-Qasim, right? If other people had this kunya of Abu al-Qasim, then it might happen, a person will be placed in a position where they may say Abu al-Qasim, intending someone else. The Prophet ﷺ would answer, and the person would be forced to say, no, I didn't want you. I wanted someone else. This is not appropriate speech with the Prophet ﷺ. So this was something that was impermissible during his lifetime. Wallahu a'lam. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah is of the view that it is impermissible to have the kunya of Abu al-Qasim during his lifetime or after, and we've discussed that topic. Another issue we'd like to touch on with regards to names and changing names. When a person would accept Islam, become Muslim in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would often ask them what their name is. And if they had a name like these names that we've mentioned, he would change it for them, right? So for instance, if a person's name was Hazn, which means very difficult road or path that is full of obstructions, he would change the person's name to Sahl, which is the opposite, ease, easy road, unobstructed, right? Likewise, if a person's name was something that was haram, something that was particular to idolaters, like Abdu Shams, right? Abdu Shams is the servant or slave of the sun because people worship the sun, right? He would change this name to Abdullah or Abdul Rahman, right? And this is something that people have misunderstood with regards to people accepting Islam. So for instance, here in America, we come from a predominantly Christian country for the most part. People are under the impression that if a person becomes Muslim, they have to change their name. If a person becomes Muslim, they have to change their name to an Arabic name. And that's not necessarily correct. As long as the name is not something bad, right? If a person's name is demonic or demon or something like that, that's not a permissible name to have. or the name is not specific to non-Muslims. What do I mean by that? Like Paul. Paul is what kind of name is that? It's a Christian name, right? There's only Christians use that name, Paul. It's a reference to Paul of the Bible, right? Which for some reason is revered. This name is not permissible for a Muslim to have, because that's a name specific to non-Muslims. Likewise, Mark. Mark is a Christian name, right? Or Uzi. Uzi is a Jewish name, right? It means power in Hebrew. This is specific to non-Muslims, okay? We would not give these names. A person who has this name would change their name. But if a person has just a regular name that's not specific to any particular religion, right? A person's name is John, or a person's name is Alex, or something that is just a general name for people in the English language, they don't have to change their name. And they actually shouldn't change their name in this case, because it only further distances people from Islam being assimilated into society. I mean, Islam is a religion that goes into all places, and it adopts the best of that culture and purges the worst of that culture. This is what Islam does. And so when people become Muslim in America and they have names that are American names, this is fine, as long as it's not a name that means something bad, or is a name that is specific to non-Muslims. كذلك العلماء اختلفوا في التسمية بأسامي الملائكة جبرائيل ميكائيل. اختلف العلماء في ذلك. الظاهر أن هذه الأسامي لم تكن في عهد النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. لم يسمي أحد ابنه ولده في عهد النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم بجبرائيل ولا ميكائيل، لكنه جائز في أصله، إلا أنه لم يكن من سنته صلى الله عليه وسلم. Another issue is difference of opinion amongst the scholars with regards to naming someone with the names of the angels, like Gabriel and Michael. It's a difference of opinion. What is apparent is that it's permissible. However, it did not occur in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's enough for tonight. Wallahu a'lam wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.